The doctors came in early this morning. They examined the patient, and they realized he was showing the worst symptom yet, exhaustion. He didn't have the energy to survive this crisis, and his body was already shutting down. And when they realized that, nobody wanted to tell Jackson. Over the last several days, all the doctors had been talking to Jackson, and every time they brought up the possibility that this could be lethal, he had been put out by such talk. He was adamant against them. It was provocative. They were wrong. He had things to accomplish. He had to get better. He would get better. They were wrong. On the last day, nobody wants to provoke Jackson. So one of the doctors, a man named Graham Morrison, is going to bring Mrs. Jackson out of the room and on the front porch tell her that her husband will not survive the day. Mrs. Jackson broke into tears, and then they wouldn't let her back in the building because they didn't want her to upset the general. The only way she could get back in here is to stifle her tears. So she did, and she came back in. But she had an agenda. She wanted her husband to know. He thought he needed to know that this was the end. When the doctors won't tell him, she does. And she handles it in a magnificent fashion. She actually knelt beside her husband's bed and broke the news by posing it as a question, asking if it was the will of your heavenly Father to be with him this day. Would you acquiesce? Now, she had to repeat the question several times before Jackson was roused from his stupor, but eventually he answered in a very weak voice, I'd prefer it. Later on, Jackson rallied somewhat and was a lot more lucid. He happened to have his chief of staff, a young man named Sandy Pendleton, in that room. And he observed to Pendleton that today, May 10th, is a Sunday. And that it had been his desire through life that when he died, he wished to die on the Sabbath, the most beautiful and holy day of the week, he said. That's very revealing for a couple of reasons. Number one, dying people are easily disoriented. They lose a sense of time or place. But Jackson knows exactly what day it is, and he knows exactly who he's talking to. And it has significance. Because Jackson didn't share that little tidbit with Mrs. Jackson or the staff officers or the doctors. It's only Sandy Pendleton, because Sandy Pendleton was a divinity student. Sandy Pendleton was studying to be a preacher. Jackson was a deacon in the Presbyterian faith, and he was witnessing his faith to that man, saying that he has only asked one thing of his faith, a Sunday, and he feels that this Sunday is his Sunday. He's not being punished for dying on this day. This is a reward. This is a complete vindication of everything that he believed in. And that's why he wanted to share it with this man. This is not a terrible occasion. This is an occasion of change, but a change that should be exciting, even if we have a personal sense of loss. Jackson looks at this as an exciting thing. Jackson looks at this as something that he wants to share with those in his intimate circle, those people that share that room with him. And with that idea, he's going to try to keep his mind sharp as close to the end as possible. And that is a battle that even Stonewall Jackson cannot win. Jackson continued to lapse in and out of reality. Delirium became longer and longer with each bout, until about an hour before his death, when Jackson just slipped entirely into delirium and did not return. 152 years ago, right now, Stonewall Jackson would be in that room, talking very freely. Sometimes barely audible as a whisper, other times just booming at the top of his lungs. According to the staff officers and the doctors and Mrs. Jackson, the general was literally reliving the last 2 years of his life. And they could pick out distinct moments from his past based on what he was saying. They recognized simple dinner conversations with the mess. They recognized evening prayers with staff officers. They recognized quiet moments with Mrs. Jackson. But the most impelling moments were the moments where Jackson went back into battle at Chancellorsville. At those moments, he would start shouting commands as he had the night he was shot, calling on various officers like General A.P. Hill to press forward Hill, cut them off, pass the infantry to the fore. Calling on various staff officers like Sandy Pendleton, have Pendleton see to it, have Pendleton take care of that. Where is Pendleton? Ah, Pendleton, I want you to see if there's any high ground between us and the river. As he worked his way through a litany of staff officers, he became very worked up, very impatient, very taut, very pert. He started thrusting himself upward out of the bed in an awkward, fetal position. It just looked painful to behold. And Dr. McGuire, the man in charge, admits that he could not bear to watch his friend die. And though he was the doctor in that room, he walked out. He left Jackson with the other doctors. He left him with Breckinridge. But he stood out here where we stand. Hunter McGuire might be one of the great medical legends. He's going to be the founder of the AMA. He's going to be the first president of the AMA. But in this particular moment, he's a 27-year-old man who's watching his idol die. And that's why he can't be in there. Those who stay in there watch Jackson continue to struggle and to fight and to order. He issues the same orders that he issued the night he was shot, and the same orders that he has given us in his delirium on May 7th, May 8th, May 9th, to the point where Jackson's a broken record. Everything he says in there, everyone in that room can anticipate and finish the sentence for him. So as he calls on his commissary officer, who named Wells Hawks, and is ready to order up warm food for the troops in reserve, Stonewall Jackson does something different. This day, he shouts out, "Tell Major Hawks to," and then he stops. And at that moment, Jackson just was completely transformed. He relaxed. His body sank into his bed. He was quiet for a moment, and then startled everyone by smiling. According to one who saw it, it was a smile of ineffable sweetness. And in a very light voice, Jackson whispered, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees." Jackson would never speak again. Many would have us believe that Jackson died immediately upon those words, but in truth, he lingered. At one point, Mrs. Jackson is going to turn to Dr. Breckinridge and ask plaintively, "Doctor, isn't there anything more we can do for him?" And he answers sadly, "We've done all that men can do." But just hearing Mrs. Jackson's voice, the general's eyes fluttered open for just a brief moment, fixed on her, and then slowly closed and never opened again. Stonewall Jackson was gone. When Dr. McGuire went back into the room, they pronounced Jackson dead. The time on Mrs. Chandler's clock read 3:15. And that becomes the moment of death, which puts us within 6 minutes of it right now. So if you can imagine what this place was like 152 years ago, right now, as Stonewall Jackson enters into his last battle, a battle that we can argue that he cannot win, or a battle that he triumphs, because he does die. But remember who this man is. Remember where he comes from. This is a man who came out of virtual obscurity. He was an orphan from the hinterlands of Western Virginia, who should have never made an indelible mark on history anywhere, on a local community, on a state, on a nation, on a world. When this war broke out in 1861, there was somebody in the Virginia legislature who asked flat out, "Who is this Jackson? I've never heard of this man." Now, 2 years later, the entire world could answer who that Jackson is. But think about where we are at the same time. While this man raises himself up to great fame and achievement, where are we? What has Jackson's fame gotten him? Jackson dies in an obscure office building in a borrowed bed. So he goes from humble origins to great heights of fame, to die in the most humble of origins. There's a certain symmetry in Jackson's life that Jackson might have enjoyed. There's another thing that's very important about these last minutes. Stonewall Jackson was excited that he was given a Sunday. But in truth, he was given a lot more than a Sunday. He was given 6 days before he died. 6 days to surround himself with everybody that was important to him, from his real family to his military family, to those who shared his religious beliefs. And he was able to talk to all of them and share a deep, abiding insight into the man rather than the myth. Jackson was given a Sunday, but he was also given a week to tell us why that Sunday was important. And there's very few people in the world that get that gift. And while what happens here inside this building 152 years ago is well documented and draws us together, keep in mind that what happens here happens thousands of times all around here, with many people who have no last words, who we don't even know their names. Jackson is just one of thousands to which this occurs. Jackson's unique, not only because of his fame, but because he also gives us the best documented week of any individual's life out of this entire war. And he gives a voice to all of those soldiers who died, though we just don't know their names, and we don't know how their last moments were spent. We can only imagine them, but we have this one.